There's not time to waste. We got to get into the top 30 wide receiver rankings for Week 11 fantasy football. And I'm giving away 5 free FFN hats for when I hit 18,000 subscribers. And the way to qualify to get one is to go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and give me your hottest take for Week 11 fantasy football. This is just my way of saying Merry Early Christmas to you guys. Dropping down to our first tier right here, we've got Jamar Chase at number 1. Listen, with Jamar Chase against the Los Angeles Chargers, this is a Sunday night game. Jamar Chase obviously has been outrageous in fantasy football. This guy has had 2 massive games, like 40-plus games against the Baltimore Ravens of all teams. And with the Los Angeles Chargers, this is a tougher matchup. This is not the same quality of matchup that he has gotten with the Baltimore Ravens. I'm expecting there to be some issues potentially with this one, but with Jamar Chase, I simply just can't rank him outside of the top tier at this point. But if you do want to argue with me that you want to put A.J. Brown or even Nico Collins above him at number 1, I can understand the argument. With A.J. Brown versus the Commanders on Thursday night, this one's a short week. I don't usually like these short week games. But obviously with A.J. Brown, he's been dominant every single week since he's been playing. He hasn't had like one bust game this year. With A.J. Brown, I think the matchup versus Washington is obviously excellent. And I do think that the short week probably benefits the Eagles rather than the Commanders here. So I think A.J. Brown ultimately has a good week this week. Very explosive in this matchup. And I think with Nico Collins here, listen, at Dallas, this game should be a massive blowout for the Houston Texans. If you want to know the truth, the only reason I didn't have Nico ranked at number 1 is because I think the Cowboys are going to get crushed by the Houston Texans. The Cowboys' defense is a disgrace. I think the Texans are going to use a lot of Joe Mixon in this game, but I do think in Nico's first game back, I expect them to get him the rock at some points, like very forced touches in the sense of like, I think they'll just try to get him going in this game. This is a cupcake matchup. Just throw him some softballs, he'll hit him right out of the park. So he's inside of tier 1 because he's elite. But I don't think game script is going to favor him in this one. That's why he's at number 3. Dropping down to our next tier right here. Justin Jefferson at number 4. And Amon-Ra St. Brown at number 5. With Justin Jefferson here, you know, the danger with him is Sam Darnold. That's the danger with him. He's got low floor, but relatively high ceiling. Actually, I don't think his ceiling is even what it always has been. Because Sam Darnold just isn't delivering 300-yard games like Kirk Cousins used to. Justin Jefferson had a little bit of a down week, but he is still obviously getting the targets that are necessary in this offense. Now, again, I do think that this game script could be a problem because I think they're going to crush the Titans in this game. But with Justin Jefferson, this could be a game for him to get right, get him back on the right track as far as getting him the big play opportunities go. You're not going to see many weeks like last week from JJ. That's why he's at number 4. Amon-Ra St. Brown at number 5. Versus Jacksonville, obviously the matchup is fantastic. They'll be able to take advantage of this defense. Again, only problem is game script. I think they're going to hammer the Jags in this game. So I don't think that the Jags put up much of a fight, especially if it's Mac Jones. But the good thing with Amon-Ra St. Brown is even in some of their blowout games, they're usually going to find him for at least 1 touchdown, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown has been really consistent over the past month, getting you that high ceiling like he did last year. So Amon-Ra St. Brown at number 5 very, very firmly. Garrett Wilson at number 6 and Terry McLaurin at number 7. With Garrett Wilson, you know, the problem last week was that they couldn't do anything offensively. They were a joke against the Arizona Cardinals. This matchup is definitely better than the Arizona Cardinals because I've been saying it leading up to the week. The Cardinals are a legit defense, guys. I hope that opened people's eyes a little bit because the Jets offense, they're not very good, but there is weeks that they will take advantage. I think this is a week to do it because he still has the big play upside and he's still the wide receiver 1 in New York. And Terry McLaurin on Thursday night at the Philadelphia Eagles. Not my favorite matchup, especially with the rate that Philadelphia's defensive secondary is improving. I don't think this is the best matchup for him. But what we've seen with Terry has been so consistent. He's consistently getting 5 catches, 100 yards, a touchdown, maybe 2, maybe he doesn't get any, but his floor is really consistent right now. So with Terry, I just don't see him busting any single week depending on matchup. It doesn't really matter at this point. Him and Jaden just have excellent chemistry. Puka Nacua at 8 and Cooper Kupp at 9 are 2 Rams receivers here. Listen, these guys, what we saw on Monday night, both these guys were dominating in target share. Like, whenever both of them are in the game together, there's just not much room for else. Like, there was no room for Demarcus Robinson on Monday night. It was Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Puka out-targeted Cooper Kupp, but Kupp was more efficient on the work that he was given. So kind of take your pick still. Like, to me, neither one is separated yet. Like, Puka looked like the number one read the most of the time, but Cooper Kupp was getting the more efficient play. He was just more efficient on every single target than Puka was. So I don't really know if I could separate these two yet. They're taking on the New England Patriots. The matchup's good. I like both receivers, so they're going to be back-to-back here at the end of Tier 2. Dropping down to our next tier right here. Tyreek Hill at number 10 and Cedric Tillman at 11. With Tyreek Hill, obviously he came in, scored his first touchdown again. Hallelujah. It had been like 2 months since we had seen Tyreek Hill in the end zone. You know, that's a really low bar for Tyreek Hill. And ultimately, when you actually looked at the game, it was another bad fantasy game for him. It's just not working with Tyreek Hill right now. Obviously, this one actually starts to feel too high when we're going to go through some of these guys below him because he's taking on the Raiders this week. That's why I like the matchup. We've got to put a kind of like never-ending question mark on him because the injury update that we got is that he has a torn tendon, I think, in his wrist or something like that. So that's probably limiting him, and it will continue to limit him because he's not going to pull himself out, it doesn't look like. Tyreek Hill has just been disappointing, but the matchup did rise him up this week for me. And Cedric Tillman at the New Orleans Saints. I want to check the temperature of the room on this one. What is the temperature of the room? Because it feels like to me, this one's polarizing. I think Cedric Tillman deserves this spot. You look at the games with Jameis Winston. He has had basically like 18 to 20 fantasy points per game and like averaging 10 to 12 targets per game. He's been the dominant number one in Cleveland, and it works with Jameis. At New Orleans this week, they're a very beatable defense through the air. I love this matchup coming off the bye week for Cedric Tillman and Jameis Winston. I think this one's going to work, and I think people are going to see just how valuable Cedric Tillman is when this week hits. Jayden Reed at 12 and George Pickens at 13 to round out the tier. Jayden Reed at Chicago coming off a bye week. I like that. I think Jayden Reed is still Deebo Samuel Jr. I'm going to say that every time I talk about him. He's going to be boom or he's going to be bust. Now, the last time he played against the Lions, it wasn't a bust game. It was actually a relatively good game. But Jayden Reed needs to hit a big one. I don't know if it's going to be this week against Chicago. I do think that he's still the most explosive option. And I will say this, the Bears defense, especially their secondary, has been bad out of the bye week. So I think the Bears are kind of just collapsing as a team in general. Jayden Reed, I think, is going to be fine this week. And then with Pickens here versus Baltimore, matchup couldn't be better, right? The Baltimore Ravens are atrocious versus the wide receiver position. That's what makes them up here higher. But I will say this. These Steelers-Ravens games, I've been watching them forever. I'm a Steelers fan, but fantasy analysis comes first for me. And when I tell you this, take it seriously. I've been watching this matchup for my entire life. These are usually low-scoring games. They're usually tough. These coaches like to slug it out with each other to kind of prove who's tougher. So I don't know if there's tons of throwing upside for either team in this game. But given that Pickens is so clearly the best target on this offense, yeah, he's going to be up here at 13 when he's taking on a soft defense in that secondary. Another thing I'm feeling really good about this week, listen, Aaron Rodgers is definitely washed up. But he is not washed up to the point where he can't get you 0.5 total yards on Underdog this week. That is what his projection is on Underdog. So if you hit the higher, you're winning free money. So if you're a new customer and you want to get in on it this week, go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, and use code FFN to sign up for Underdog. They'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 of bonus cash when you take advantage and hit the higher on the sweat-free pick for Aaron Rodgers this week. Dropping down to our next tier right here. People aren't going to like this one. Drake London at 14 and DK Metcalf at 15. Obviously, let's address the reason, the elephant in the room, why is Drake London so low? I get it. Listen, guys, I've come around to Drake London. You know I like him. I didn't like him at the beginning, but these are minor details. Drake London is taking on Pat Surtain. This is the reality. I think everybody has come to accept that Pat Surtain has been locked down this year. Hopkins was shut down last week. Every other receiver basically has been shut down this year. Ironically, aside from George Pickens. Drake London, I think, is going to struggle this week. At Denver, this is in Denver. They're coming off a couple bad losses. I think they're going to be mad. And I think Pat Surtain is going to do his work against Drake London. But obviously, London is still good enough to be able to come out with a touchdown in this game, or maybe, like 10 targets and like 6 receptions for like 80 yards. So, of course, he's going to be at 14. And then DK Metcalf at 15. Obviously, does he return or not? I've seen optimism saying that he might return this week, so obviously that's a good sign. They're coming off a bye week too. They're taking on San Francisco. They've had time to prepare. Obviously, DK Metcalf, the first time they played, was not a great result. But DK Metcalf still is a big play threat, and I do think since they didn't trade him at the trade deadline, they've got to figure out a way to make it work. I think DK Metcalf, if he plays this week, top 15 is good. T. Higgins at 16 and D-Hop at 17. With T. Higgins, obviously same deal. Can he play this week? I've seen good things. I've seen that they upgraded him from week to week to day to day. So that's a good sign that he may be able to play this week. I would love to see it. We would all love to see it. With T. Higgins at the Los Angeles Chargers, I actually do think this could potentially be a good matchup for him because a lot of attention obviously goes to Jamar Chase. Well, T. Higgins this year has been really good on a per-game basis. Don't forget that. It's easy to forget because he hasn't played like the past month. T. Higgins has been excellent in fantasy. Dude's looking for another contract. He's going to continue to play well. We just need him to actually play. DeAndre Hopkins is 17 at Buffalo. Listen, I would love to rank him much higher than I did last week. And it is higher. Like, obviously, to be clear, this is higher than it was last week because he got shut down by Pat Surtain last week. I can't do that much higher because Buffalo is also good against the pass as well. Their defense is really good against the pass. So, Hopkins being the clear number one that he is, he was able to squeak out targets and some production last week against Pat Surtain. He'll be able to do more this week. But D-Hop ultimately needs a little bit of a softer matchup, I think, in order to hit the ceiling, which is what we saw against the Bucs several weeks back. Darnell Mooney at 18 to round out this tier right here. At the Denver Broncos, I do think the reason he's inside the same tier with Drake London is because I do think with all the attention going to Drake London, when it comes to Pat Surtain, Darnell Mooney can make some things happen. I think that there's a clear... No, I mean, honestly, like sometimes Darnell Mooney out-targets Drake London. Like, Darnell Mooney is the guy that Kirk Cousins goes to when he needs to improvise. I've got a newsflash for you. This is an improvisation weekend coming. Because Atlanta's offensive line, they're not terrible, but they're not the best in the league. And Denver's got one of the best pass rushes in the league. They're going to get after Kirk. So he's going to have to improvise sometimes. And I think Darnell Mooney actually could be in line for a good one this week. This guy has already been good. He's like a top 12 receiver right now in fantasy points per game. You got to play Darnell Mooney this week. Dropping down to our next tier. CeeDee Lamb at 19 and Devonta Smith at 20. With CeeDee Lamb, obviously, the dude needs targets. He needs to be force-fed 15 targets because last week, 10 targets wasn't enough. He had 10 targets and he still couldn't squeak out 10 fantasy points. Like, that's our reality right now with CeeDee Lamb is that he needs an extraordinary amount of targets per week. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know if they're going with friggin' Trey Lance, or they're going with Cooper Rush again. Either way, it sucks. And Houston's a bad matchup. But obviously, if CeeDee gets peppered with 15 targets in this game, then he can do well in a PPR format. But this guy, I can't rank him much higher than this. It just can't happen at this point with me. Devonta Smith, like I said earlier, I think the matchup's really good. The Commanders are definitely beatable through the air. They just got ripped apart by George Pickens. They've been ripped apart by a lot of receivers this year. Thursday night game, Devonta Smith was an estimated non-participant in practice on Monday. So we'll have to monitor this one, see how this week plays out for him. I would imagine, unless he had a re-injury, Devonta Smith is going to play in this game. That's why he's in the rankings, but I do think that Devonta Smith has a higher ceiling than CeeDee Lamb. Probably not as high of a floor because we've seen it throughout the season. He's in line for 2-point games sometimes. Deebo Samuel at 21 and Jacoby Myers at 22. With Deebo Samuel versus the Seattle Seahawks. I was looking through it after the game. Deebo Samuel has just not had the big plays. Like, his volume this year has actually been pretty solid. His volume last week was actually pretty solid. He's just not hitting the big plays. Now, with Seattle, he actually did hit big plays the first time they played the Seahawks, so maybe this is a good game for him. The reality being, like, until he hits those big plays, I'm not going to rank guys like Mooney, who have hit the big plays, or guys like Hopkins, who have hit the big plays, or somebody like T. Higgins, who has hit the big plays. I'm not going to rank them below Deebo at this point. I think Deebo needs to prove it a little bit that he can hit a big play. The guy's been injured throughout the year. I think that's affecting him, and he just hasn't hit many big plays. I think there's a reason for that. So with Deebo, I'm ranking him down here at 21, and Jacoby Myers. I think that some people may argue this is too low. Jacoby Myers taking on the Miami Dolphins. Now, the reason I didn't rank him higher is because the Dolphins are actually pretty tough against the pass. I think his matchup with Ramsey this week could be an interesting one to watch to see how good Ramsey really still is. But with Jacoby Myers, this guy is going to dominate targets every single week. He's going to be an 11 to 12 target guy every week. So in a PPR format, he's actually probably the better option than a guy like CeeDee Lamb. In a half PPR format, he still belongs here at 21, I think, because I do think he will have his struggles against the Dolphins here, but I obviously really like Jacoby Myers this week. Josh Downs at 23 and Zay Flowers at 24. With Josh Downs here, I really like the player. I really like the target share that he gets, But it's not working very well with Joe Flacco. And honestly, I will say this. I've been saying this throughout the past couple days. Do not be surprised if they go back to Anthony Richardson this week. I think it's a possibility. Like, Flacco has thrown 6 interceptions the last 2 weeks. I guarantee you, when they said, we're going to have Joe Flacco as our guy the rest of the year, they did not have this on their bingo card. I don't think that's the case. So honestly, I wouldn't surprise me if they go back to Richardson, his upside is just cut in half. But at the New York Jets this week, it's a beatable matchup. And I do think that Downs is so clearly the favorite of Joe Flacco with or without Pittman. So obviously he's going to stick inside the top 25. Zay Flowers at Pittsburgh. I said it earlier with George Pickens. Zay Flowers, there's a couple problems here. Number one, I think that this matchup is going to be more of a ground and pound game. I think this is a battle of who's got the bigger balls and who's tougher. That's always how it is, Steelers-Ravens. Number two, Zay Flowers isn't the number one like all the time. Like, especially with Deontay there now, I expect him to get him more involved. And Rashad Bateman's been taking big plays too. He's not the clear number one that Pickens is in his office. So in this type of game script, I don't think that bodes well for Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers has already shown us throughout the whole year, his floor is super low, but his ceiling is really high. So he may hit his ceiling this week. I don't think it's going to happen in this particular week, though, because this isn't a matchup for it. I'm telling you guys, I've been watching this matchup for years. Dropping down to our next tier right here. Jackson Smith-Njigba at 25 and Juwan Jennings at 26. With JSN at San Francisco, obviously coming off the bye and coming off his biggest game of his entire career. JSN was a monster. Almost 200 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns as well. Now, the good thing with Jackson Smith-Njigba is that you can expect him to maintain 8 to 10 targets per game, even when DK Metcalf comes back. And this, by the way, is a ranking if DK is back. If DK isn't back, Jackson Smith-Njigba should be looked at as a top 20 wide receiver. Probably in that 18 to 17 range for me. Jackson Smith-Njigba, though, right now, if DK is back, you just can't, factor in the big play upside with Jackson Smith-Njigba. DK is going to have that big play upside, taking it away from Jackson Smith-Njigba. So, yes, targets are going to keep JSN inside the top 25, but big playability, if DK is back, that automatically goes down. Juwan Jennings here. Juwan Jennings is going to be a solid play the rest of the year. With Juwan Jennings, he got 11 targets in this previous game versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. Now, obviously, Seattle's defense is not as bad as the Bucks are through the air. So I don't expect Juwan Jennings to have that same level of effectiveness in this game. But of course, I do expect him to continue to get 7 to 8 to 9 targets per game because they just need him. Deebo Samuel's not a traditional wide receiver one, and Ricky Pearsall is still growing. So I think Juwan Jennings is still the better play long-term than Ricky Pearsall to me. Ricky just beat him out with a long touchdown the other game, and that, I think, is just not something you can predict moving forward. Calvin Ridley at 27 and Ladd McConkey at 28. Rounding out this tier here, Calvin Ridley, it's been working. Let's take it seriously. It has been working for Calvin Ridley the last 3 weeks. Whether it was Will Levis or Mason Rudolph, it's been working for Calvin Ridley. So it's good to see that for sure. Minnesota is a different story. That game, I think, is going to be brutal for the Tennessee Titans. The Vikings defense, it's not like they're great against wide receivers in fantasy, but what it is they're going to get after Will Levis, and they're going to hit him a bunch. And I think it's going to rattle him to the point where he can't hit Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley is dependent on a quarterback that's ultimately a joker. That's what it is. So with Calvin Ridley, I do like the upside here. That's why I've got him above Ladd, but his floor is still so freaking low. And Ladd, at the same time, versus the Bengals on Sunday night, I think the matchup's really good. I actually think this could be potentially a big Quentin Johnston game. I'm ranking Ladd above him, though, because I think that Ladd is obviously the more target, he's going to get the more targets in this offense. So if they're going up against bad secondary, which Cincinnati is, it makes sense to have Ladd in front of Quentin Johnston because Johnston is still averaging 4 to 6 targets per game. Ladd's getting more than that. So I think that the middle of the field could be open this game for Ladd McConkey for him to have a pretty solid game this week. But obviously his ceiling outside of one game this year has been relatively low. Dropping down to our last tier, I've reserved it for 2 Buffalo wide receivers, Khalil Shakir and Amari Cooper. Amari needs to play. Obviously that all depends. But with Khalil Shakir, the reality with him is that if Amari doesn't play, he's not a very good, he's not the wide receiver one. He's not a wide receiver one in fantasy. It doesn't translate with him. He's a unique role player. And that's what he needs to be served as. And he's best with Amari or with Keon Coleman. Khalil Shakir, if it's no Amari and no Keon, which Keon's already been ruled out, I don't see him having tremendous upside. Either way, both of these guys have a brutal matchup versus Kansas City. That is not an easy matchup to take on for any receiver. So I think their floor is ultimately pretty low this week, and I think their ceiling is relatively low as well. So let me know how your lineup's starting to shake out this week, and if you want to see the top 30 wide receivers rest of season, click on this video right here.